method that I tried for starting a narwhal and the one that I like the best. This is the magic loop method. So the first thing which I'm doing is casting on the 4 stitches that are required. Once you get those 4 stitches cast on, what you want to do is basically split them between the 2 needles on a long circular needle. So I'm going to move the stitches to part of the cord, and I'm just going to pinch that cord between the middle 2 stitches and pull the magic loop out. And I'm going to bring those stitches and put them back onto my 2 needles. So I'm going to have 2 stitches on each needle, and then we'll talk about kind of how we want to position it. Once we get those 2 stitches divided onto our 2 needles, we want our working yarn to be coming from the back needle. So you can see that I'm pulling the working yarn, and that is coming from the needle that in our video is on the top, or essentially the farthest away from me. So you can see the working yarn. That needle, the one that's farthest away from me, is the one I'm going to use to knit the first set of stitches, and I'm going to knit them off of the needle that is closest to me. I want to make sure that my needle goes underneath the working yarn so that I don't create kind of an artificial loop between the 2 sets of stitches. This particular pattern calls for you to knit front and back. I think they abbreviate that KFB. I will tell you that especially in the first couple of rows, as you can see, it's a little difficult to get your needles into position, so you want to try to cast on slightly loosely, but I'm never very good at that. So we're going to enter the first stitch as if to knit. We're going to make that knit stitch, but we're not going to slide that first stitch off. We're going to turn our work over and go into the back side of that stitch. So I have my needle in the back side. I'm going to put my yarn over and complete the second knit stitch. So I've now knit 2 stitches in that stitch, and then I will slide that stitch off the needle. I'm going to repeat that for all the stitches on this first round. So we're going to go into the front loop, make a knit stitch, turn our work over, find our way into the back of that same loop, make a knit stitch, and once we've got those 2 stitches, then we'll slide the stitch off our needle. So now we've knit the first 2 stitches. We're going to take that needle and turn it around. So again, the working yarn is going to be coming off that back needle. And then we're going to slide our magic loop through the remaining 2 stitches until we can get them back on the needle that we just emptied. So I now have 4 stitches on the back needle, which I just worked, but I have 2 stitches to complete the round on my front needle. I'm going to pull my back needle out, and I'm going to continue to knit through the front loop and knit through the back loop of each of these remaining 2 stitches. Okay, as I said, sometimes you struggle to get your needle into that back loop. I'm working with metal needles, and I did find they were a little bit slippery, so sometimes my stitch wants to slide off, but you just have to deal with that. So again, you're going to knit through the front of the stitch, knit through the back of the stitch before you slide that stitch off of your needle. Okay, and so we're going to knit through the back, and then we've completed our first round. So we now have a total of 8 stitches. Once again, I'm going to turn my work around so that my needles are pointing to the right. I want the needle with the working yarn to be the farthest away from me. I'm going to slide my other needle, pull the connection, the loop through until I get the stitches back on that front needle. And so again, and sometimes it can be a little bit snug to get it to feed back onto your needle, but now you can see we now have a total of 8 stitches, 4 on the front needle and 4 on the back needle. I'm trying to make sure that we have 4. We're going to once again knit the stitches off that front needle using the back needle. And you can see that I always want to make sure that my working yarn, that my back needle isn't tucking up underneath that working yarn that it's free and clear. The second round also has you working into the front and back loops of each stitch. I will tell you it does get easier when you start putting just some regular knit stitches in here. Now you can see in this instance that my needle kind of wanted to slide, my stitch wanted to slide off my needle before I had finished knitting in that back loop, so I had to kind of put it back on the needle. This is why I think this method is easier, because I've only got 2 needles to deal with. I don't have like a whole conglomeration of needles as you would with double point. But again, you're going to knit through the front loop and through the back loop, which is going to give you an increase of a stitch for each stitch. So you're going to double your number of stitches. Notice that I kind of use my thumbs to do my best to keep the stitches on the needle. You could see the stitch kind of slid off, but I just slid it back onto my working needle, and so that I can try to get back into that back loop without losing the stitch. And so again, you can just enjoy my frustration with me. And we finally get into the back loop of that stitch. We yarn over, we bring it through, and then we can slide that stitch off the needle. And then I'm going to repeat that again, knitting in the front loop, kind of turning the work so I can see that back loop, trying to pick up the back loop, knitting in that loop, and then once I've knit through both the front and the back loop, then I can slide it off my needle. So again, we're going to knit through, and again, your stitches kind of want to run off the needle, so it's possible that using maybe a bamboo that has a little bit more grippiness might make this easier, but just be aware that it's not anything you're doing wrong. It's just kind of the nature of the beast with this particular stitch that they're using. And so once again, once I've knit the stitches off the first needle, I'm going to turn my needles around so the points are facing right. I'm going to slide the stitches back onto that second needle. My back needle is the one that the working yarn is coming from, so I'm going to pull it out of its stitches. Those are the stitches that I just completed. And I'm going to do again knitting through the front loop and then knitting through the back loop for the remaining 4 stitches. Okay, so we're again going through that back loop and knitting through the front loop. And trying very hard not to let our stitches kind of slide off. I think when I tried to pull my yarn over through, it just didn't feel quite right, so I just decided to back out and do that one again. Grabbing the back loop, going through the back loop as if to knit, and then bringing that yarn through. Okay, and sliding that stitch off the needle. Okay, maybe I didn't quite catch that back loop because it looks like I tried to put it back on the needle again. And again. Yep. This one was giving me issues. It just didn't want to cooperate. But I think we did eventually get it knit through the back loop. Okay. So again, knitting through the front loop. And then before you slide the stitch off your needle, you're going to turn your work over and knit through the back loop. And again, truly, as you get a little bit more material, a little bit more fabric made, it does get easier to kind of get in and out of these stitches because things just loosen up a little bit as you get some regular knit stitches in there. Okay, so now we have done the second round. Once again, you're going to slide the stitches back up onto the needle. You're going to turn the stitches to face to the right and kind of work those stitches back onto your needle. So you now have, I think we're at 8 stitches, maybe 16, I don't remember. 8 stitches on each needle. And again, you want to pull your yarn, your needle out from the back, which is where the working yarn is, and knit the stitches off of the front needle, because that will keep you actually working in the round and keep things as they should be. And then I think my stitches were kind of tight here, and I think I gave up and said, yeah, I probably need to just stop the video and make sure everything is good. But hopefully this will give you a little bit of an idea of how to get started with your nose for your narwhal.